when that injury happened, it became so simple. I didn't care about anything other than walking.
Right.
That was it. Literally, every day was, what step do I need to take to walk? And sometimes that step would be opening and closing my toes at least 10 times a day, because that's all I could physically endure with pain.
Right. Welcome back to the show, listeners, fans, viewers, everyone else.
Haters.
Sort of in between. Today, as always, another amazing show and another awesome guest. Today, we're joined by arguably the most interesting man in the world, what I would say. It's been brought up to my attention before, and probably yours. I think it was that one night that we all went out together.
That's right.
That Stephen is probably the most interesting man in the world.
That's
so we're
right.
gonna hold you to that for this interview. I know that personally because I know you on a very personal level. I just want everyone else who's watching or listening to know that as well. So if you haven't, noticed by now, Stephen is a very good friend of ours. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he is the founder and CEO of Hello Cannabis. So, Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm elated to be a part of this, and it's even easier to look at your two beautiful faces this entire interview.
We get that a lot.
Time well spent during a workday.
Yes. Oh man, you're making me blush. Wow. It's not good because we have video now, so everyone can see how red I am. What did I want to do? Right. What I wanted to give some people context. Just let them know that I may or may not have fucked up this before in the past with Stephen, because we've kind of been going back and forth a few times trying to get him on the show. So I do apologize for that because it's been a clusterfuck, but I am super, super, super thankful that it worked out and that you're on the show now.
We're excited.
You caught me at a good time, and I'm in town for a few weeks, and I'm elated to be here. And are we allowed to drop F-bombs?
Absolutely. We encourage it.
Absolutely. If you want to, go ahead. If you don't want to, that's fine.
I just got interviewed by the Globe and Mail right before, I had so
it's kind of the opposite of that type of interview.
I would say
for
it's
sure.
the exact opposite.
We have a not safe for work tag. I think on the show that it says there is some explicit language, so
we cover our bases.
Yeah, we cover our base. We try to, at least. All right, so we're going to get into a bit of a Q&A, and like I was telling you, this is just so everyone listening right now and watching has a better idea of who you are on more of a personal level, and then we'll dive into some of the meaty stuff. So, first question, what did you have for breakfast today?
Oh, good one. I had a smoothie. It was rolled oats, mixed frozen berries, a frozen banana, some vegan protein powder, and this is rock bottom. I had some leftover breakfast sausages from the night before, which I just ate cold out of the
Oh boy.
So smoothie and breakfast sausage.
yeah.
They balance each other out.
Well, it's better. We had one of our previous guests. He had a banana and was it salmon jerky?
Salmon jerky.
And salmon jerky.
That's a good West Coast breakfast right there.
Yeah, yeah, right.
No, I'm dead serious. That's a regular part of an Nanaimo diet, man.
Oh my God, I would have never guessed that or even wanted to. But how many cups of coffee or tea do you drink in a day?
Ooh, mean average is probably 1.5. I go a few days without, and then I will just crank them back throughout the day and into the evening. So I'd say 1 or 4.
1 or 4.
With a few zeros in
it's
there.
Kind of teetering on the
Okay.
extremes there. I love it.
Definitely, yeah. It's anything but stable.
Yeah, right? Yeah. iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Okay. Favorite book of all time, if you have one.
The Good Psychopath's Guide to Success.
That seems fitting.
Favorite quote
Good
or
psychopath.
it doesn't have to be a quote. It could be or best piece of advice that you've been given. Or if there's one that kind of stands out.
Give me.
You want to come back to that?
10 seconds on that one. All right. So, since F-bombs are allowed, we're clearly going on something pretty clear. And this is some pretty good advice when I was a teenager. I'd moved out on my own, and I got a little glimmer of fatherly advice, which, to be candid, was few and far between. But this one stuck. He said, "Stephen, you're gifted. I believe in you. You're going to be able to achieve your dreams. Here's some things that will up." He said, "Go to class, always. All you got to do is show up, and you've got a brain. You're going to get through it. Your first job is to get through school. Your brain is going to be able to define what you're capable of for the rest of your life. Your body will eventually break, especially if I know you." I said, "All right." He said, "Other than that, don't get a girl pregnant until you're married." That was it.
I like it.
I
I hope that was helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
I'm sure a few of our listeners will probably need that advice. Okay, so kind of flipping that 180 then. What is the worst piece of advice you've been given? Sounds like you've probably had a lot of shitty advice thrown your way.
Don't sign those papers. Don't sign those papers. You can't do it. And you're taking on too much risk.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And the last part is the most important part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because risk is something that is very, very, very subjective, in my opinion.
Right.
And
couldn't agree more.
at that time, I could take on the risk. It was a financial transaction. I had the opportunity to buy 4 houses side by side, 2 on the left side of my current home and 1 on the right. It would have stretched me way beyond my means, but if I kept them rented, I'd be able to float it. And I realized after the fact, I crunched the numbers and it did make sense. And numbers often don't lie. They're one of the few things that don't. And the person that gave me that advice was lying, and the reason was so that I would continue helping them with their career. And I missed out on a multi-million-dollar opportunity.
Wow. Yeah, that's
a good one for the art of the fail.
Risk is very subjective, and you have to know your own risk and be able to deal with the repercussions if it doesn't work.
Absolutely. See, that's actually, it's funny because that is a good piece of advice from a shitty piece of advice. So thank you for sharing.
We see the circle of the art of the fail.
Yes, the circle of advice here. All right, last question, arguably one of the more important ones. Are you ready to actually? We've already started, but are you ready to get started and start talking about some failures and get right into it?
Oh God.
Never met a guest,
He was giving me a hard time here, so just bear with me 1 sec.
No worries.
Very sorry, gentlemen.
No worries.
So it wasn't an oh God, you were worried about talking about failure. It was just technology.
All right, now I'm ready. I just needed a bit of a timeout. Sorry.
Okay. Whew. Did you hear my last question? Did that go through?
I did not hear it.
Okay. Yeah, the last question was just, are you ready to get started and start talking about some failures?
Oh, absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
There we go.
Love it. Talking personal or professional, because they're both long lists.
Both, either or. Honestly, whatever you want to give us. I mean, we'll probably poke you and prod you a little bit, but
yeah. So Stephen, why don't you give us and our listeners a bit of an overview about you? We know very little about you at this point, and so let's take a big step back and tell us what got you to starting this company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm an investment banker by trade. I worked as an investment advisor at Scotia McLeod 7 years after graduating in economics at McMaster. I got my chartered investment management designation, allowing me to be a portfolio manager, derivatives, futures, options, all of that fun stuff, insurance as well, which is a requirement, one of your first requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Moved over to RBC Dominion Securities, which is, in my opinion and many others, the largest, most reputable investment bank in the country. So it was a real big jump for me. It was pretty exciting. I had moved up the ranks rather quick. Ambitions were always bigger. Thought that I could go independent. Went independent. And had a pretty crazy accident, my own fault. I dropped over 20 feet, shattering both of them. So it was a free climbing accident. I've been a daredevil my whole life, climber, rock climber, soccer player, stunt guy, just idiot all around. And this one was a bad one. I ended up shattering both of my feet. I was on my own. I had to call some friends to literally carry me, and I had to climb over a fence without using my legs. It was rather challenging.
Jesus.
So it put me in a wheelchair for 6 months.
Wow.
Surgery, 17 screws, and 2 plates. Arguably one of the most painful surgeries you can endure. And I was prescribed 6 milligrams of Dilaudid every 4 hours. Now, a rec user can shoot up 2 milligrams of Dilaudid and get high. So you can argue that I was taking enough synthetic heroin, I'll use that word strategically, to shoot up 3 times every 4 hours, except I was just obviously taking it orally. So I had a 3-month prescription. So you can imagine what state you would be in if you were taking the equivalent of shooting up every 4 hours 3 times for the course of 3 months. So I was a junkie by day 3, let alone 3 months. Mm-hmm. So I quit cold turkey after month 2. I had a massive withdrawal. I didn't sleep or eat for 4 days. I had a wound care specialist seeing me twice a day, treating a surgical wound that got infected. Almost lost my foot because of it.
Wow.
And she said, you're dying. You've lost like 18 pounds and you don't have much to give. You can't even swallow water anymore. You got to eat, you got to sleep. And I'm like, I can't. I had completely lost my mind. There's being an insomniac and being delirious. And then there's losing your mind, and then there's not eating or sleeping for 4 days, like you, and coming off of heroin after 2 months of nonstop usage. So it was a wild mental and physical test. And she recommended that I use cannabis because you eat and you sleep with cannabis. Mm-hmm. So I did. And my buddy showed up. We smoked some bongs. It was great. I almost died coughing. And the irony, because I was actually dying from heroin withdrawal. Right. So I smoked, and then I slept and I ate, and I felt great. And I smoked again. I slept, I ate, I smoked, and you can see this pattern. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I pretty much haven't stopped doing that since, except I'm a bit more conscious about how I medicate now.
Right.
But long story short, I've been using cannabis as medicine ever since that day. And I don't think anybody would ever associate the word lazy and stoner with me ever.
No.
So I'm living proof that cannabis can be used strategically and responsibly to curb extreme chronic and acute pain and insomnia. For me personally, it also helps many of our other patients with other ailments. And that was kind of my deep dive in the cannabis industry. I got back in finance, selling insurance. We started our own hybrid
Stephen, can I just stop you for 1 second?
Yeah.
I just wanted to stop right on the end of that story. There's an issue with your video. Can we both just turn off our cameras and turn them back on?
Yeah, let me see if I know how to do that. Turn off video.
Let's try it. Throw it back on for us. Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. All right, continue. Sorry to stop you.
We were actually seeing 3 of you and no color. Yeah, we were seeing 3 of you. As soon as you started talking about heroin, we literally saw 3 of you. And I was like, this is fucked.
Anyways, you may continue. Very interesting story.
Can you fit where do I?
Yeah, you were just saying that you were getting back into finance.
Yeah.
Getting
back into finance.
Yeah. So I was just getting back into finance. We started a hybrid robo-advisory firm called Huxton Black. We're in the 3rd floor of the Empire Times building. And
this
we
is
have
in Hamilton, right, for our listeners?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hamilton, Ontario. So we have an exempt market dealership license, which allows us to package private deals and sell them to different investors. And there's a massive opportunity in the cannabis space. I had some ideas that I thought were pretty progressive and forward thinking in a way to stretch our pennies far further than a lot of the big people with tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars behind them. So with a lot of sweat equity, an unbelievable team, and in my opinion, a really forward-thinking concept in a few different areas of the cannabis space, we created these companies, financed them, and they all branched off of Huxton Black. So it's kind of I've turned into the cannabis arm of a private equity firm that's now evolved into me overseeing a bunch of different cannabis entities, one of which was just recently sold, and now I'm focusing entirely on Hello Cannabis. So Hello Cannabis came about because after my injury and using cannabis, that cannabis I acquired was from the black market. It was really challenging to find doctors to get a prescription. And it still is. I believe only 18% are prescribing right now, up from 13% last year. So it's progressing, but not as fast a rate as, in my opinion, the product deserves.
Right.
So we started an entity because of my relationships, both by being in and out of the hospital all the time, by being an idiot, but also as a financial advisor. I knew a lot of doctors, and they knew about my recovery story. So I was able to tap into them and say, listen, you've heard about my recovery. There's mandates now to reduce the amount of opioids that you prescribe. You thought about using cannabis. And they said, well, it worked with you, didn't it? And I explained my story, and they bought into it. And thankfully that they started sending all of their patients over to us, and it just started snowballing ever since then. So we now have, I believe, 36 physicians that are sending us patients now.
36. Wow.
36. We have 12 that we can tap into to prescribe based on our last numbers, and that's increasing almost on a weekly basis. So we connect patients with doctors that understand the product as well as nurse practitioners, and we connect them with a patient educator that understands cannabis products through and through, and make sure that they get the right dosage, the right knowledge on how to use the product effectively and safely, and help them acquire that product through licensed producers that are governed by Health Canada. So we are the legal entity to connect patients with doctors and product.
So it's interesting because I would argue that you probably agree with me. You don't have a unique story in how you came about this company. You had a problem personally, and you sort of set out to solve it. I guess the unique piece in this all is the cannabis, and
Yes.
and I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how you mitigate, if any, the stigma around this type of business, even though it's now becoming legal in all over the world, et cetera, et cetera. How did you think about that initially, and how has that thought changed maybe as you've sort of been at this for a while?
Wow. Well, I've been at this for a very long time. I'll be honest, cannabis has been, as a Dutch guy from Vancouver, you can imagine I've been around cannabis for a very long time. I'll leave out names and details, of course, but I've never seen the harm in the product with my peer group. I'm not going to say that I haven't seen other people be negatively affected by cannabis, because it is habit forming, and it can induce negative reactions in many people. People can use it as a crutch for escapism and to get away from responsibility. I've seen that countless times. Out of sight, out of mind, and they would use it. They would abuse it. I should say, not use it, abuse it, to avoid reality. And any narcotic is very easily used for this. So the stoner stigma still exists to some degree, but far less than it did before. When I jumped into this, you can imagine what I thought my peers back in finance, because to be candid, I was working for the largest firm at a very high level, and got quite a lot of media coverage at a young age too. People had a pretty good idea who I was and what I was up to. To see my injury and that absolute failure crush my ego, my pride, all of it, I did have a big chip on my shoulder, wondering what my peers were going to think if I got into cannabis. Because I got in early enough where people were like, "What the hell are you thinking?" Or he's got to be a drug dealer. And that was the undertones of most conversations. It was kind of
Right.
like a chuckle. And sure enough, 4 years later, when I'm getting invited to speak in Berlin, flying to Asia twice in a couple months purely for business, opening up shops in England, putting applications in Poland, looking in Northern Africa for cultivation sites, brokering deals for patents. Like, this is stuff I've literally done in the last week.
Wow.
The conversations changed completely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're like, "Wow, this is crazy. Like, what are you doing? Like, how's it going?" And yeah, 4 years ago, they're like, "Oh yeah, I remember Verbeek. He was that crazy broker kid that was a soccer player, right? And like he was a rock climber that did all that crazy stuff and broke his legs, right? Yeah, I remember that guy. And then like, yeah, he got into weed."
Well,
You know,
and you hear this story all the time, right? I mean, in any endeavor, right? Like, again, we always try and relate this back to any person, and in anything that they're trying to accomplish. Usually, there's sacrifice and things that you're having to put up with, or that you have to give up in order to achieve something, and so my question becomes, what forced you specifically to drown out all of those voices in order to do what you do now?
Read The Good Psychopath's Guide to Success.
He's sticking by it.
Yeah,
I think we might just actually have to read it now.
It's truly fantastic.
Yeah.
But it just has to do with being able to control your emotions to be able to make the best decision for the greater good and finish the task at hand without distraction.
Right.
So it's conducive kind of to your question is I've made significant errors along the way, personally and professionally. But I know that my intent has always been for the greater good. And I know all of my staff right now know that I'm kind of the firewall between them and harm for many cases. And I've taken that on the chin, personally, financially, and even in their personal lives on numerous occasions. So you're kind of, you got to be the champion, and you get beat up along the way for sure. My reputation's been absolutely destroyed in many occasions within small cliques or groups, so to speak. And ironically, the ones where I think my reputation was damaged the most was completely on fallacy and fabrication.
Right.
I can do enough harm myself. But yeah, you really have to be able to tune that out. Like, I believed in this product. It changed my life. I saw it change other people's lives. And I'm able to sleep in the bed that I make. And if I've screwed up, no matter what, I'm going to bed in that bed that I've made, whether I like it or not.
Right.
And the only thing that I can change is how I react the next day. And I do believe that if I was to give advices, no matter what, you are going to screw up. The difference is how much you're able to be accountable for it, own it, and take corrective action, or accept that you're not going to take corrective action and you're just going to deal with the repercussions of that mistake happening going forward. But regardless, you have to be aware and accountable for it. And truly, I think that that's something that is unfortunately lacking right now in many parts of society that I've seen firsthand.
Yep.
All levels, whether like crosses gender, race, religion, generation. It crosses everything. People are very much lacking accountability, and I think that's a big difference maker. It's like, yeah, I fucked up. That's on me. Here's what I need to do to fix it. Can you just stop beating me while I'm on the ground? I accept it. I'm here. Well, let's fix it now, and you can beat me up later again. But let's focus on a solution, not the problem.
That's super interesting. Christian and I were talking about, well, I think we were talking about something similar before we got on air, about honesty. And I think it relates in a lot of ways. Like you said, in the current climate, the current society, I think people, maybe it's because there's so many eyeballs on us, with social media and just being hyper connected, that we actually have gotten less honest and therefore less accountable. We put up these fronts.
I fully agree with that assumption. I know it's difficult to be able to put evidence behind that, but I would agree with that theory.
It's interesting, and I mean there is a lot of psychological literature on being honest and telling the truth no matter what, which could even go down the rabbit hole of being unapologetically yourself and all the rest of it. Something I wanted to go back to, similar question to the one that I was asking.
Forgive me, I just got a network connection thing. Can I reset my video again?
We can see you fine. Or you can't.
Can you hear us?
A little bit of a delay. Just give me one flash.
Yep. Good.
Sorry, that's better.
How's that?
Did that mess you guys up at all?
Nope, it's fine.
No, not
Absolutely.
at all. Not at all.
Sorry
You
about
were.
Yeah,
Well,
about to get into the next question.
I had a question. I wanted to go back
ahead.
to something, but you go first.
Well, I just wanted to go back to the whole being able to drown out voices piece, in order to be who you are now and accomplish what you've accomplished. Did you feel the same way when you had that massive injury? It's we've seen, from other guests and things like that, all of these different hardships and them happening at different times in folks' lives. And this injury one is fairly unique. We actually had a story. The episode hasn't come out yet, but I'm keen to hear how you actually motivated yourself to push through that hurdle, particularly at that time in your life, and how that differed from the voices of the stigma of cannabis.
Great question. So it was pretty. My life got simplified very quickly there. It's since become very, very complicated. I'm finding myself falling into similar habits, and I'll be totally transparent. I'm struggling with them because I don't want to fall back into those habits. But prior to my injury, I was moonlighting as a DJ, playing with like international celebrities, I would say. The captain of the city championship soccer team, the youngest chartered investment manager working at the firm. It was a very complicated, busy life. And when that injury happened, it became so simple. I didn't care about anything other than walking.
Right.
That was it. Literally, every day was, what step do I need to take to walk? And sometimes that step would be opening and closing my toes at least 10 times a day, because that's all I could physically endure with pain.
Right.
And that's how simple it gets. Or lining up pillows across my living room and crawling across them a minimum of 10 times to start getting my core strength back.
That's
when you're
fascinating.
I truly mean this, like from the ground up, man.
Yeah.
Like face first in the ground.
And I imagine you're an individual who obviously is moving very fast, and then to all of a sudden stop and slow and without any control over it. I mean, I'm sure our listeners or watchers can relate to this in some extent, because I'm sure we're all fast moving individuals, and just have something that stops you and dead in your tracks. Keen to continue your story, please.
Forgive, I missed the last sentence, mate.
Sorry, no, I just said continue your story. I'm keen to hear the motivation behind getting over that.
Yeah.
You're right. It was an absolute reversal, and I'd like to think most entrepreneurs kind of spend their life in a dark tunnel, and you're working towards a light at that tunnel. And I know if I'm working towards that light, I'm okay with it. I get pissed off when I get pushed backwards, but if I'm working towards that light, it's a good day. That injury taught me how to embrace the dark tunnel and the little victories. Like if I was able to open and close my toes 10 times that day, fuck what anybody else was thinking or saying. I opened and closed my toes 10 times that day.
Right.
That was a good day. It was truly, I'd say 12 months, but at least 6 months of extreme focus on self-awareness and self-improvement, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And it was a very powerful experience to simplify my life and be able to focus on one step at a time.
Right.
And I think the building blocks that I learned through that injury translated towards business now.
Yep.
And, I'm trying to reset and be able to start focusing more on day-to-day stuff as opposed to chipping away at 15 balls in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, just with the workload that I have, I'm falling back into that habit again, and I'm trying to mitigate it.
Yep.
It's a work in progress, but that learning curve that I had, physically learning how to celebrate each little victory, but accomplishing at least one thing every day, and then reflecting on that was life-changing for sure.
Yeah, that's you know what, that's a very important lesson, I think, for anyone watching and listening. So my question, kind of, you know, going off of yours, was also with your injury. It's safe to assume or to say that without that injury, you would not have gotten into the cannabis industry. Without
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you
absolutely
at the time you were working as an investment advisor at the time, and then you went back after, it was 6 months, right, that you were out for, or that you were in a wheelchair, and then you went back into finance. Would you say that were you the same or a different person when you went back?
Oh, very, very good question. So, same person, very much improved and progressed.
Okay.
But my DNA is my DNA.
Yep.
There's many pros and there's many cons. I'd like to think I've been able to find ways to fill the gaps in the negative ledger. Always still a work in progress, and that negative ledger always you're constantly adding to with the more fails that you make.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah, that's actually a very, 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 very good topic.
Well, and I would have gone back and asked, sorry.
What are you doing there, man? This is my headphones.
Just fucking trying to get you. I would have asked, would you change it if you could go back? Would you erase that from your life?
Oh, my favorite. So, you're walking right into this. This is a very, very true story. In a line that I've used many, many, many times, and I mean it without any doubt. You could give me a sheet of paper and a contract and say you can go back in time. You can have your feet back. You can never suffer another step of pain ever again. You can go back to playing top level soccer again, and you can go back to your old job where you were making a very, very lucrative stream of money at a very young age, and all you got to do is show up to work. I wouldn't even think about it, man. Wouldn't even consider signing it whatsoever. I wouldn't trade what we're doing right now for the world.
I think it's an obvious answer, but it's a fascinating one, you know. And I think it comes full circle too about our conversation of the current society. And I hate to be that guy, but I'm gonna be because I got the microphone. But you know, we have less in. I won't say less. I'm not an expert on the subject. We have different hardships in 2018 and in the eras that we grew up in, right? And I think it comes full circle. Like you're seeing less. I think you're seeing less people have that type of mindset where they really value that those hardships, you know, because they see what's on the other side of that. But I think every generation says that about the last and the next, you know.
I think that's fair. But But I love you brought it up with society now with all eyes on us. It's changed things a lot.
Yeah.
And there's many societies and cultures that I've visited where they're a different person out in public than they are in private.
Right.
And they're extremely different people. And they're not necessarily bad people. I've seen cases on very different sides of the ledger here. They're very different people in public than they are in private. And I found that very fascinating. And the more and more, and these were cultures where in public it was public.
Right.
There was no privacy. So you had to put your mask on when you walked out your front door every single day. And we live in a society now where with social media, everybody sees the highlight reel of everything. And trust me, if I pulled out my photo album and showed you the weekly highlight picture over the last 3 years, like it's pretty legendary. Like I don't mean to sound like it's pretty cool. Yeah. If I showed you the lowlights of that, there's very few people that would want to experience those highlights by having to go through those lowlights.
Right.
Trust me.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, that's what we're trying to do with this show.
Yeah. And the society right now is perpetuating a FOMO society, which is something I suffer from an extreme.
Yeah, myself included. We were just talking about this on the last episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's perpetuating jealousies, perpetuating insecurity, it's perpetuating facades. And people are no longer themselves. They're who they want other people to perceive them to be.
Right.
Or whatever their public persona is.
Absolutely. And
that authenticity is very much lacking. And that's also coming full circle back to this accountability thing that we were discussing as well. Like, look what's happening right now in the U.S. with Trump.
Yeah.
Look what he's saying on camera. And look what the reality is. Like, this is now evidence. And he's still on camera.
Yep.
Denying it for his public image, right?
Yeah.
Like we see this. It's people have their reputation, they hold it, and they want to hold it to such perfection. And I love what you guys are doing here with the art of the fail. And like the list is massive, man. The failures are what people really miss, and how you deal with those failures, in my opinion, will define somebody with far greater strength than their successes.
Well, and let me just play devil's advocate for a second too on the whole Trump thing, because I think the counter, what's the word? The counter
point
argument.
Point happening. The byproduct, the counter byproduct is I see a lot of silencing of free speech and not even good conversations, long form conversations, people talking about this kind of stuff. And I mean, I have to say this, like I always do, we don't try and pretend to have the answers or be experts at all, but I think it's good to talk about this kind of stuff and have open forum and have differentiating opinions and things of that nature.
I totally agree, and I'm not gonna lie, I cringed when I second guessed myself by saying what was the best advice I ever got, and I was saying it obviously with a certain degree of humor,
right?
But I could imagine I'm probably going to get lit up by somebody saying like, actually, I turned out fine, and my girlfriend got pregnant before marriage.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, dude, like, don't take that out of context.
Yeah,
like,
Well, fuck it. Yeah.
Like, I said that with humor. I'm not trying to save anybody's life here.
Exactly.
Well, and look at the line we're towing, right? I think when you silence free speech,
I could look like an absolute ass.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm an asshole for saying that.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. We're not having these open conversations.
Hey, but it's not necessarily your advice that you're giving to someone. It's just advice that you were given.
Blame it on your old man.
It's.
But people, you're right though.
People take everything out of context these days,
and they don't dig. They don't do their own research, and.
Mob mentality, man.
Yeah. And the way that the media and even the major tech companies that control what we're consuming, the way that they manipulate the message is also super problematic and very surface level and sometimes flat out incorrect. And then it causes, like you said, these highlight reels and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I want to.
Oh, can you hear?
Can you hear us?
Yep, I can
Oh,
hear
okay.
you. There's a bit of a poor connection there. I missed the first half of Chris's speech, or I hope there wasn't a question.
Nope.
No, I
question.
don't think. So I kind of want to move things
Yeah, yeah.
along a little bit. I want to dive right into Hello Cannabis. When you were starting it up, I know that you've been doing it for a while. So if you want to just give everyone like a brief history of when exactly, the idea of Hello Cannabis came to fruition, and what some of the more major complex challenges were that you faced, because I'm sure from start to where you are right now, you've probably had a lot of hiccups and road bumps along the way.
Still do.
Yeah,
Best part.
exactly.
Never bored. So when the MMPR campaign came out, that was where the government opened up the doors to allow people to apply for licenses.
Mm-hmm.
I was working with a couple of gentlemen that were cultivating a few greenhouses that they developed themselves. They were actually more or less the inventors of the hybrid greenhouse used specifically to cultivate cannabis, and they did tweak this, and it is a fascinating system. And the land that they were cultivating on for a series of medical patients was then taken over by a licensed producer, a legal one, because they came through and saw what we were doing. They were cultivating it legally. They had an interesting way to distribute it to patients, but it'd be very challenging for any law enforcement or judge or CRA to say that what they were doing was wrong, illegal, and proceeds of crime. So they were very tactful with it, and they genuinely did this from a place with a good heart. So that's stemming back 5 years, a year after my injury.
Okay.
Conversation started while I was still in my wheelchair, because that's when the announcement was made, and I truly remember this. And this is another gentleman that I urge you guys to reach out to, a great Hamiltonian. He goes by the name Hamilton Holmes, but his name is Nick Holmes. He designs custom furniture. His work is absolutely exceptional. I've had the privilege of knowing him since high school, and lived with him for a couple of years at my house as well. And I was still in my wheelchair, and when that news came out, I looked at him and I said, "This is what I'm going to do. I am going to run one of these companies one day." And from that point on, I read literally every single piece of paper that the government ever issued for that. And learned tried to navigate where I'd be able to carve myself in as somebody that had zero income, a decent nest egg that was depleting rapidly on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to basically find deficiencies in the marketplace that I could kind of plug my way into and then work my way up. I'd done this before in finance, where I wanted to see what is all my competition doing, what can I do differently. And unfortunately, in that world, you're competing with the people literally across the desk from you, and they treat it like that as well. Trust me. There were very few people with derivatives, and with a derivatives license, there were very few people with a chartered investment management designation. So those are the first two things I did. And then, boom! All of a sudden, you're the youngest CIM working for a particular firm, and next thing, it's like, oh, you can trade derivatives too? Wow! It just so happens that we have a gap there. We could use you, and you can also do this and this. Like, yeah, I can. Great, come on over. So I was able to carve myself into an old boys club, which is the unfortunate reality back 15 years ago, at age 22. And between 22 and 28, I was working with people that had been doing this 20, 30 years and were far more intelligent, educated, and successful and experienced than I was. And they brought me under the wing because I found that niche. So I tried doing the same technique in the cannabis space, where I was like, all right, what do they need? And they need patients, because otherwise they don't have revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you get patients? Well, you need doctors. And I know a lot of doctors. And I know cannabis inside and out. And I was fairly knowledgeable even prior to starting Hello Cannabis. So I reached out to all these physicians. And I know that each physician has a specific roster and number of patients, and each physician would potentially be able to refer X amount of patients. And if I had a relationship with X amount of physicians, then we would be able to derive X amount of patients, and figured out where we would achieve critical mass and where we would actually hit grid parity, and it'd start being an entity that would be self-sustained profitably. So the clinic model came out before anything else. And at the same time, I was looking at production sites, and we were interviewing with multiple different CEOs of different LPs. And when the conversation was turning more towards the clinic than it was us being great cannabis growers, I realized that I was onto something. I was sitting in a room with the inventors of the hybrid greenhouse. I'd been cultivating large-scale cannabis in greenhouses longer than anybody else in the country, arguably anybody else in the world. And
Wow.
one of them is from good old Hamilton, Ontario as well. He's a very, very close friend of mine and still business partner to this day. And they didn't even care. And at this time, the companies that we were pitching were shit at their job.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had hundreds of millions of dollars, but like the list of their fails is literally in the tens of millions of dollars. Like they just burned money, absolutely burned it, and they were horrific at their end product. It just wasn't. The black market was crushing them. This is going back 3 years. A lot of them have stepped up the game since then, thank God. But when they weren't paying any attention to the talent and experience of these growers, and they really just wanted patience and revenue, that's when I realized I needed to focus a lot of time on that. So I started just soliciting physicians, telling them about my story, and I had a very strong relationship with a few very highly respected local ones that said, meet this friend, meet this friend, meet this friend. And anytime I had a warm lead like that, we batted 100%. Like my story is unexaggerated, it's raw, it's real. I can show them my prescription, that's a real prescription. I can show them how many pills I still have to this day in case of some crazy medical emergency.
Right.
I think I'm actually supposed to dispose of those things, but sweet rule. They're safe. They're in a safe. It's fine. I can show them that I quit after 2 months. It's not fun, and I was privileged. So it's a very strong story that is a recovery story that Hamilton needs, and Hamilton has one of the worst opioid epidemics in the country, and therefore the world, because we're the second largest consumers of opioids in the world next to the U.S.
Wow.
So our own backyard needed help. So there's a great feel-good story there. I firsthand had experienced it. I have some family members that have decimated literally their entire family in some cases because of opioid addiction. So it's something I felt the need to do. And as a financial advisor, investment banker guy, clearly wanted to make sure that it would be financially stable and potentially lucrative. So I figured out a way to be able to monetize those relationships and come up with a business model where we can provide a free service for patients to be able to get a prescription for cannabis, and for us to be able to source the right product for them to be able to help their ailments.
So it's no question, obviously what drives you to do this every single day. But through this experience, I'm gathering one thing that really stands out, and maybe it could help some of the fellow entrepreneurs who are listening, or anyone really. But how important is the story to the sales end of the business? And if you can unpack that, how has it evolved, and how do you position that for the brand of the business, because it seems to be at the forefront?
That's a good one. There's a lot of subjectivity there.
Sure.
I'm under the impression that the CEO should be the best salesman of the company, or the founder.
Right.
If it's your baby, you created it, you envisioned it, you should be able to understand it well enough to be able to simply explain it to anybody.
Yeah.
And if you can't simply explain it to anybody, you don't understand it well enough.
Yeah.
So when you say how important the story is, I would argue the inflection point, of where Hello Cannabis became an international entity that I had to start focusing on to capture some of these opportunities, was actually telling my story in Berlin. That was was the breaking point for us. It was a room of over 700 entrepreneurs, investors, and doctors, scientists, like the who's who in the medical and finance world, sitting in one room, and it was received to the point where there was like a 2x2 line after explaining that story and telling about what our mandate was and how we focus on education and physician first, patient first, and making sure that it's a seamless process to bring access to a product that is dramatically reducing harm in our backyard. And that was a sales pitch that did it. And it was just a story, and telling, similar to you, exactly how I came about doing this, why we came about doing this, and what our mandate is. So I think it is very important. It has been for me firsthand. If you don't have a good story, you better have a damn good product at a damn good price.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
thankfully, we have all three.
Right. Right. This is going to be a tough question for you, or maybe not, but I've had the opportunity to see a lot of pitches, having gone through a couple accelerators, startup accelerators, and I know that stories evolve and stories need to be simplified. Stories, maybe some stories, maybe not yours, but some stories need a little elevation. How do you think about that as it relates to, trying to tell an impactful story that actually sells something, and also how that can be translated down to your team and your employees and and even arguably your evangelists, your customers, who are going to and undoubtedly tell that story itself? Is there any elements that are fabricated, and to what extent?
Great question. I can openly say I had to de-escalate my story. In many sense, it's a pretty gripping one. If I was to really lay down the evidence and speak raw, it's cringeworthy. So I think I'm a unique case, and as a storyteller and a salesman and somebody that's a socialite, like you get caught in the moment where there's forms of elevation or exaggeration, but when the exaggerations are with respect to like reactions, or like I was laughing so hard I almost pissed my pants, blah 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 blah. Those are innocent, and I think anytime the further you go away from the reality, the less authentic it will be.
Right,
that's a good point.
I'd like to think that good people and smart people are pretty good bullshit readers.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that the one compliment we continually receive, particularly with our salespeople that are on the ground, is our authenticity. And it's raw, it's real, there's passion, and there's authenticity there.
Yeah.
And my story was far from the truth. That authenticity just wouldn't exist. I have caught myself before my ego told me to say it was a rock climbing accident, which unfortunately is a fabrication. I will say I failed there, and that's a regret that I had, because I thought people would judge me because I was by myself free climbing, doing something I had done many times before. I own it now. It was in print. I forget the location of it. Was accidentally in print somewhere else, and interesting enough, an ex-girlfriend caught it, and she's a very lovely vocal female that I do genuinely still hold a lot of love and respect for. But it's unfortunate that she wants to find a way to find harm or kinks in any armor to chip away at, which is really unfortunate. And I heard it was like, regardless of this conversation, it's nice to hear from you, and I hope you're well. And that it set her off into like a crazy tirade. Like crazy is probably the only word I would use to describe it. It's accurate. And it was genuinely true. Like it was like, it's nice to hear from you, and I hope you're well. And I'm sorry that you felt the need that I was being dishonest to any viewers. It was a legitimate accident. and it's expected, have a nice day, and fixed.
Yeah.
So the story does need to have some fluidity. It does need to have some emotional response. And if your authentic story cannot induce that emotional response without being exaggerated or fabricated, you got a shitty story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in that anecdote about the hiccup in print or what have you, that I mean that can be a lesson for actual fabrication of stories, right? And how unauthentic it can.
It's a typo.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a typo.
Yeah. In that case, it was miscommunication, and like a step up from a typo that was very quickly remedied and owned, accountable.
Yeah.
Yes.
No
accountability. We're coming full
theme.
We
of the
actually
story. That's going to be in the title.
Somehow we do that really well on this show, and I don't know how the hell we managed to do it, because it's like we bounce all over the place. But somehow everything, yeah, that too, of course. So I do know how we do it, but somehow it just like literally comes full circle to that point of this time. It's accountability. I love it.
Accountability.
Well, and
that's fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Owning your fails.
And I think that's a good way to start wrapping up and slowing things down for this episode. It's funny because this season we started naming them, naming the episodes based on.
Oh,
on
I
topics
know.
and
Yeah,
themes,
before we would just do like season 1, episode 09. Now I all on Chris. He decided to get a little creative, so now he's actually named the episodes based on the content that's.
There'll be a good one here.
Within
Something
each
to
episode.
do with drugs, broken feet, and accountability. You know.
maybe
Those
not. It sounds like
it was fantastic. You got two handsome, intelligent dudes that are thinking progressively and bringing people out and sharing their humbling stories. And I think it's a brilliant idea, man. I truly mean it. People that define themselves out of how they deal with their failures resonate far more powerfully with me than people that define themselves with their successes.
Absolutely.
And obviously we think the same
and
thing.
it kind of, again, not to like go full circle on anything, but it sheds some light on accountability, of course, but truthful and being authentic. Like those who simply only show us their, quote unquote successes. Of course, that's all they fucking want to show you.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Stephen, before we sign off, if you will, we'd like to end every show with one thing, and it's to ask you to call out somebody that you would want to see on The Art of the Fail. Now, it doesn't have to be somebody that you know.
I call somebody out, and I was like, oh god.
Ideally, this person's alive, but they don't have to be. That it wouldn't be a first here on The Art of the Fail.
That's true.
But whose story do you want to have told, basically?
Oh man, there's some real good ones. Some real good ones recently.
We'll take more than one name.
I've got the perfect one.
Okay.
Sahab Jamshidi, without any question. Dr. Sahab Jamshidi, my best friend.
Okay.
I'll hit you up for his contact.
Yeah, absolutely. He's working in Iran right now, but he has internet and he is very much able to do this. I urge you to look him up. He has got one hell of a story.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're excited. Hopefully we can have that conversation and share it with the world. Awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you again so much for your time. We had a blast today on the show. Christian, any final words?
None from me. No. Stephen, any final words?
I'm just really grateful to spend some time with you guys, man. I hope I was able
Likewise.
to contribute some stories that hopefully will empower, help, or make people laugh. Something positive.
Absolutely. Actually, you know what? One kind of final note before we go. Where can people find Hello Cannabis? Let's say they want to come in. They want to come in and visit the clinic, or even they want to find you guys online first.
Absolutely. So our headquarters and operations is in Dundas on 51 Coots. It's very close to McMaster University. Typically, everything is done online at hellocannabis.ca. You can actually book an appointment right there. Our services are free of charge. Email is very accessible as well.
Awesome.
So it's meant to be a remote system.
Love it.
That provides accessibility pretty easily. So
perfect.
Amazing.
Excellent. Thanks again, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you. No, not you. Yeah. Thank you for watching today's episode.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Before you leave, please subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you know when we put out new content. And there's some recent videos somewhere here, okay? Check those out because we got a lot of good content, a lot of good episodes for you. A lot of failures, a lot of fuck-ups, including our own.
That's it.